our speaker is Maria Montgomery, all the way from Australia. Maria is an enthusiastic leader at UniSuper, managing a large team of business, technical environment, and testing resources. As a result-driven leader with more than 15 years experience across multiple industries, superannuation, insurance, financial services, health services, logistics, and aviation. She is passionate in helping organizations build strong delivery capabilities with experience in challenging business transformations, owning her own small business, and consulting startups. Maria's presentations are not just about the theory and certification. She highlights practical strategies, steps, how you can apply these in the real world and successfully achieve your personal and team's goals. Her focus areas are facilitation, training, problem solving, stakeholder management, business analysis, and building a center of excellence for delivery teams. In order to get business analysis right, we need to have the right mindset, be able to ask the right questions, and understand the best delivery models and tools. Maria tonight will guide us through the business analysis journey, the complexity of business analysis world, and provide a guide to how business analysis can be done right. So over to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for such a good introduction. I am going to start sharing the screen. So if you just bear with me. Can you see my screen?
Maria, it's a blank page.
It is blank. That's good. Just about to put, now it's not blank. Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be part of, your IIBA from the other side of the world, so far away. It is 1:26 p.m. in Australia and about 33 degrees. So it's very hot. And I'm here and it's very cold over there. So hopefully you're not too jealous. What I'd like to, just to give you a bit of a spiel about Australia as well, I would like to provide acknowledgement of the Australia, which is obviously, I would like to acknowledge the Rujiri Wurugu, I'm struggling with the wording, people as our traditional owners of the Yalukit William, a name meaning river camp or river dwells, which was later named Williamstown. And that's where I live, which is an area in Melbourne, where I'm from. These were the first occupants and they were from 2 Aboriginal clans. I appreciate and have a deep respect for them, caring for the water, beaches and parks, which I love walking around. I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I've sneaked in a little bit picture just to give you an idea where I live. So this is Williamstown and it is surrounded by beaches, and Melbourne is kind of about 8 kilometres from where I live. So what I'll do now, actually, the way we structured tonight's speech, I'll be covering 2 topics in interest of the time as well. And the first topic, and which I'm passionate about both, is how to use neuroscience to effectively solve business analysis problems. In today's environment, in today's session, we'll be covering, I picked three things that I like you and hopefully can take away with you in your BA world. Is our brain, how does it work when, we do problem solving, which is one of our core skill set, and how cognitive and neuroscience belong in that BA landscape. And then I'll leave you with a few questions to take away with you that you can keep in mind to ask as business analysts. So our brain is a very interesting organ, shall I say. We have the front cortex, which is prefrontal, and that focuses a lot on problem solving. In this part of the brain, we actually define what the problem is, what type it is, and then it's actually the back of our brain called anterior cingulate, again I struggle with wording, cortex, which we actually do a lot of assessment of potential solutions. We quite often go backwards and forwards trying to figure out what are the best solutions that we can resolve. My natural tendency tends to be in the front part, in the problem solving. I quite often hear from my husband, in everything that I do, I always come up with a problem, and he constantly gives me feedback. Why do you always have to, find problems in everything that we do? And I guess it's my natural tendency that where my brain works is on problem solving. I have discovered that more I need to, I guess, spend more time on assessing those potential solutions. And I have found a great lesson that I use from 9.problem, like thinking outside of the box, that you can Google online as well, that can help you work on those creative ways of solving problems. You can check it out on the internet. So our brain and problem solving. So how does our brain work when we're trying to actually solve a problem? It's a very interesting fact that I found, again, through my findings through internet, that it's that our body consumes about 20% of energy in actually thinking about problems, problem solving, resonating with those problems. And I've highlighted problem solving in this slide because that's where I believe a lot of business analysts spend a lot of time. And our brain actually consumes a lot of this energy on thinking on those problems. And for example, 1.1 calories per minute. I kind of tried to think, oh, maybe I'm actually losing weight. Even though I'm exercising, I'm still losing weight by using my brain a lot. So can you just imagine how much calories we'll be using when we're actually trying to uncover or work on very complex problems? We quite often go backwards and forwards with different points, looking at the different stakeholders and working through their problems, understanding what's important to them. That results in a lot of, I guess, energy. So key message here is that how small part of the body consumes so much energy when we're trying to solve different problems. So how does our brain work? As earlier covered, and looking at different sides of the brain, how does it actually work when we're solving problem? That's when this creative thinking, and quite often you'll see in our BA landscape that one of our skill sets is actually being, having that creative thinking. It's about looking at different combination of information. We work with it. We analyze information. That's our core role. So, for example, when we're assessing those problems, it is important to think about every possible solution, to research and try and uncover perhaps somebody that might have solved that solution in a different way, and see if we can have lessons learned or use those similar situations. And then it's also finding a new perspective, seeing a different perspective. As a leader with my team, particular at UniSuper, I always encourage and challenge my team members when they come up with problems or difficult people that they're dealing with on projects, to always ask them, what are the problems, what are the challenges, root cause of those problems that you're having? And I've learned that all from my boss in the past. He's no longer my boss, called Barry Williams. He's always made a huge impression in my world when I've came up with planning and challenges. He's always asked me, and what is the actual problem that you're trying to resolve? So the key message here is that search on those previous combinations and spend more time and trying to analyse those problems that you're trying to solve. Interpretation of the problem is another interesting topic. I've got two cartoons here, which you might have seen on internet. We do share a lot of stuff, particularly on LinkedIn. But if you look at both cartoons and both numbers, it's a perception. We have that people can look at the same thing or situations from a different perspective. The misunderstanding and interpretation of those problems could actually result at the end in all the additional work that we have on projects, and also misinterpretation or expectations, what we see potentially as a business analysts and what those stakeholders are expecting of us. Business analysts do play a big role in facilitating problem solving with most critical and maybe innovative solution. And I find it quite interesting in the cartoon where we see, one person might see a boat in far ahead, and somebody else sees a land. They're just totally different concepts. So what I like to do now, if that's okay, just to get you a little bit involved, I'll be interested to hear from your point of view before I get into the cognitive science, which I'm hoping most of you might have. There's a lot of that talk going on in our world at the moment. And neuroscience, I like to pop in a chat if you can pop in. What do you think cognitive science and neuroscience mean to you? I'm struggling to see a bit. I'm going to need you to look at the chat because I've lost my chat.
I have the chat open here, so if somebody says something, I'll let you know.
How we learn and understand. Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, yeah. Neuroplasticity is a very good one that talks about, particularly about growth and mindset and fixed mindset, understanding how the brain works. Definitely. Awesome. And it is all about brain. I personally started having a great interest in this space. Brain power. Oh, I like that. It is very much a brain power, such a small organ. Dealing with my teenage kids. I've got an 18 and 22 years old, and I can't say the teenage years have not been somewhat challenging. So that was another reason why I've taken a lot of interest in this space. Perception from emotions perspective, definitely. And if you're working with different people on different projects, we all have got emotions. How we interpret things. Definitely. Those are all good. See, I managed to see the chat now. How the brain processes knowledge. Awesome. Thank you so much. They're all very good points, which will take me to the next slide. And I've separated cognitive science and a BA landscape, just to put a more perspective on the work that we do, but it also applies to your personal life as well. So as we mentioned in chat, we're really on top of it. Cognitive science is about your mind and how our brain works. It encompasses study of our thoughts, which cognition means, and that includes our language, our problem solving, decision making, and also how perceptions, for example, for example, consciously we might be aware of things and see things in different way. For example, we could be dealing with a senior stakeholders and that they will have a different perspective. And I think from BA angle, depending where you are in your career, you will need to work on your language, on how you communicate with quite a senior. If you're talking to an exec, they definitely don't want to be seeing detailed requirements. That they probably want to see things at the high level that they're interested in, whether it's a cost, benefits, the key problems that you're trying to solve. So we kind of need to adjust our ways of understanding how others communicate, how the others think. The next one is, and it also attempts to understand why we think or act a certain way. So it triggers those brain cells to make us think what the choices that we're making, how we can make a most practical decisions as well. So the next one is the neuroscience and BA landscape. And as you guys have put in a chat, also, neuroscience specifically focuses on how the brain works, those mechanics around our brain, functionality, and systematically how we produce some of those observable behavior. For example, I know if I'm a little bit anxious, my brain kind of just works differently because I'm nervous that I need to present to a certain meeting. I might go really red, believe it or not, even though I love talking. So my behavior, I talk with my hands, and I still do now online. And that can be sometimes a discretion for me. So I know how in certain situation we can, work differently. And thinking in this way, when you put yourself in those situations, when you're dealing with different stakeholders, you might put a different perspective of how you view that situation. So cognitive and neuroscience, I call it a golden BA. It's really summarizing and putting all those key topics and how those actually apply to business analysis. So if you look at the cognitive science, it's all about psychology, working on our problem solving, decision making. And neuroscience kind of gives it that activity that goes on in our brain constantly, thinking about different solutions, thinking about different problems. This also helps us to be creative, innovative, to look at a different perception, to provide you those thought processes and how we behave in different environments. And I find a really important aspect as a business analyst is to actually tune into your thoughts and finding those, even the relevant information for your key stakeholders is deep diving into their thoughts and understanding how their brain operates. For example, if you're talking to an accountant, you might be talking about lots of figures that you might need to potentially turn into requirements and business rules and so forth. It's looking at the real cause of a problem, deep diving into those analyses. The big one for me, I find, is that having that insight, that aha moment. I find that being able to receive a lot of information, to get somebody else's point of view, at times it might make you realize and have that aha moment. In my research, I've discovered that some people, and sometimes I do this myself, whilst they're having a shower, that start thinking, even cold shower, I don't know, I haven't tried the cold shower, I'm more of a warm shower person, that you might just go, oh, I've got an aha moment, and you quickly jot it down, because, in different environments, we think things differently. It's also being able to take a perspective or ability to see different things from somebody else's point of view. As we covered visually previously, and looking at those cartoons, it's putting yourself into that position and seeing what they might be seeing. Visualization is a great tool, and it does help us to see things different, and it also helps with rational thinking. I find myself that drawing, I'm a drawing person, also help if I want to show a problem. And I'm a big fan of process maps, if anybody ever follows me on LinkedIn. So what I like to do now is do another little activity, just to keep you amused. I like to, if you can please pop in a chat, what do you think are common challenges? Maybe just the top 3 in the interest of the time, or 1 or 2, that you find are common challenges in today's world for business analysts. And I can see the chat. Understanding the business problems and its impact. Totally. Engaging a diverse range of stakeholders with different priorities. That's a very good point. And they will definitely have their own agendas. Tailoring reports, getting time from the right stakeholders, conflict relationship between stakeholders, conflict resolution. Definitely. And this is where our core skill set again plays in. Working against cost, time versus quality. Competing priorities definitely depends what area you're in, and what your organizational overall goal is. Sometimes that drives a lot of our technology initiatives. Identifying, wow, there's a lot, isn't it? And lists keep on popping in a chat, and I will continue observing those And some of these, and there's more, obviously, that we've, clearly defined in this chat. And these obviously sound familiar. Definitely that disconnection from your stakeholders and the groups. We're struggling to get on the same page as our stakeholders, having those clear requirements. At times, what we're finding is actually missing the right questions. Sometimes unintentionally, we forget to ask the right questions as we trying to tune into our stakeholders. Gaining confidence and trust of the stakeholders. Throughout my career, what I found at times, stakeholders withhold information back and trying to deep dive into that. And we all know devil's in a detail to get that information from them. Sharing information and raising flags. Also those missed body languages and other clues, how somebody's feeling and behaving. A lot of us might have invested interest for different reasons. We could be having something going on in our personal lives, or we could just not be interested in a project, so they've got a lot going on in their business as usual activities that they do. So looking at maybe some of their body languages and working around that could give us some clues on how to work better with them. Oh, I like that. Also post your thoughts on common challenges. Awesome, thank you. Not understanding why things are done a certain way. Sometimes we just can't get to the bottom of that why. Change management, good one. So what I like to leave you with and to have a think about is and if we reflect back on what we were covering in the slides previously, it's about our brain, and I deep dive deeply into the problem solving, because I feel that's one of the core skill sets that we try as business owners needs to have, and at times it takes years to develop as well. But have a think about 3 questions. How does the problem present in your stakeholder mind? Think about what's going on in their heads from that neuroscience perspective. How does solving the problem involve reorganizing and rewiring their BA, rewiring BA thoughts? How does solving this problem involve reorganizing, rewiring also not just your thoughts, but also stakeholders' behavior? And there is a lot. I do have more slides that I go through that rewiring and neuroplasticity, but in the interest of the time, because we're covering 2 topics, for the purpose of these sessions, I have picked only a few sections, but maybe in the future there's a lot to be covered around how we can work and rewire our brains and work in the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So I like to pause now, because my next session my topic is the art of getting business analysis right. And what I will take you through first is showing you what the session is all about. So I'm going around with. So there's a fair bit to cover in this specific topic, because it's such a large topic. To get business analysis right can be so, there's just so many areas to cover. So what I will do today is cover the business analysis, look at our story and evolution. How do we come about with business analysis? Then we'll be looking at our current challenges and problems that we need to solve. We'll look at the impacts of those poor business analysis. What does it mean? And also getting business analysis right model, which is what I've put together over the years of my experience and what I've uncovered to help me get the business analysis right. Then we'll be looking at what does it take to get business analysis right. And then I'll be covering some samples and a competency, why it's so important to have the right skill set. And then we'll finish off with key takeaways with those 7 key ingredients of getting business analysis right. And I'm hoping that after you finish this session, that you can have at least 3 takeaways with you that you can work on, and that will help you in your analysis. And I'm hoping you're here today to hear how to get business analysis right. So this takes me now to the art of getting business analysis right. And what I'm here to keen to hear from the audience, and I'm having really good, quite involved audience, which I'm absolutely loving. When I say the art of getting business analysis right, what does it actually mean to you? I'll be keen if you can share your thoughts in the chat. What's the first thing that comes in your mind when we use the word getting business analysis right? Our process in performing the required activities. Very good. I like the process word. Translating customer requirements to tangible, viable solution. Understanding the goals. That's very important. Solving the dilemma posted. Love it. Effective processes. Yay. I feel they're solving the dilemma posed. Definitely those key problems and challenges that we're trying to solve for our clients or customers. Streamlining of processes, definitely. Simplifying things and adding value. Love that. Definitely adding value. And also getting the right problem solved. Exactly. Trying to find those key problems, which our previous section should be able to help. So if I take you through a bit of a journey now on business analysis, and I love this story because it is a story to tell. And when I did a bit of research myself, and I discovered that it was once upon a time, actually 1940s is when business analysis practice was actually born. And it started as a practice when the first programmable computers were actually birthed, or born, shall I say. And at that point, the role that became more apparent was actually system analysis. And I quite often wonder why is it still, and I find particularly in Australia, that some organisations are still trying to uncover the value of business analysis. But when this role came about, was around, my understanding is more in those government, universities, organisations, they've invented a lot of data. They had a lot of storage issues and difficulty to deal with those data. So they started to have programmers looking at different ways and discover that they couldn't actually talk to programmers in a way of understanding what their needs are. And that's when the original system analyst roles started to come about. I remember the days in my career when I started as a business analyst, and I do politely put 15 years, but I think it's nearly 20 years ago, 28 years ago, actually, when I started as a junior business analyst, and we had in 1994. And that's when I had a company called Ansett. You probably won't be aware of it, but it was a big airline company, which doesn't exist anymore. It did go under. But the BA role became really crucial in that company. And I was studying a Bachelor of Business in IT, and they had a sandwich year. And what I mean by sandwich year, that allowed universities to go in and do a bit of work experience and then get work. And I ended up having a career at Ansett. And that's when I discovered the role. Because what happened to me, I got stuck in program. We all had to do program at that point in time. I remember COBOL back in those days, and I absolutely hated it. I thought, I cannot sit here and do programming all day. It just wasn't my thing. So through my career thinking, I thought, what can I do? I love talking to people, as you can tell. I love being around people. And I discovered my strength was, and something that I wanted to do, business analysis sounded really good to me. I think my discovery or my analytical passion came when I was even in my childhood. My original background is from Serbia. We migrated to Australia. And I remember my mum always saying to me, you just ask too many questions. You're constantly thinking about things. So that's kind of my career and how the whole business analysis world has evolved. I feel particular, and I can talk to, and I'm assuming worldwide, hence IIBA, that this role has evolved, and it's actually become even more important, pertinent with a lot of companies that are evolving, changing solutions. As a leader, I have discovered that the importance also has come not only from the business process perspective, where BAs get involved in strategic level, and I'll cover more around the skills in that space, but also technical analysis, because we're working a lot of technical solutions that technical analysts have become important. And obviously, through different methodologies such as agile and so forth, you know, we adjust to different areas. So current challenges are problems. So we talked a little bit previously around BA problems that we're having. What I have uncovered, and I'm sure there is more, but I've summarized a few that I find quite important as a leader that I see that I had challenges with, that I had to overcome. It's actually a lack of centralized business analysis community. What I find that in many organizations, particularly even at UniSuper, first thing that I did is create a business analysis community of practice and get BAs involved. And that doesn't seem to be that centralized, one size, I guess, fit all for our work. And rightly so, maybe, you know, it doesn't fit because we all work differently, or organizations are at different phases of how they do their project life cycles. There's also inconsistency between business analysis approaches and outputs. I find that when I worked in banking, I spent a lot of time in the banking sector here in Australia, and I moved into superannuation, and I've done a little bit of work in health sector as well. That approaches was quite different, but I could use my learnings to apply in different organizations or take them on that journey. Meeting project stakeholders' expectations can definitely be challenging, because different stakeholders and in different organizations have got different expectations. There's also constant project planning, replanning, scope creep. So it depends what project manager you have on a project, or stakeholder or a sponsor that keeps on changing their mind. We also need a specific domain knowledge, whether it's your, for example, superannuation sector. I know in some projects that we really needed those key superannuation knowledge to be able to talk to those product owners, because they're quite complex. Retaining competent business analysts. Not sure what your market's like on the other side of the world, but particularly in Australia, BAs are in demand, believe it or not. And what I find, we get to a certain competency, and not all projects can be fun. I find that BAs tend to move different organizations. So how do you keep them involved? And retaining them is challenges that we're going through here in Australia. And there still is that lack of BA role and responsibility. How many of you have been to use this term, jacks of all trade? I'm not sure if that's an Australian term. Quite often we get asked to do different things, like they forget that we got core business analysis skill set. They think, you know, I find project managers asking BAs to do master of many. That's right, I like that one. Joys of having two screens. Yeah, so you just kind of think that you're a resource with lots of skills, and next few slides will show how many skills we have, but you know, they expect you to do different things. So understanding this challenge is important. And as business analysts, we need to overcome these and make sure that we don't ignore them, that we try to get them right. And if they're not done right, and we're not recognizing and being aware of the problems, this also leads to poor outcomes and cost overruns in our projects. So impacts of business analysis, again, I'm sure that, you know, there is more that you're aware, and feel free to keep on popping stuff in a chat. It'll be fantastic. But the facts that and studies have shown that rework can consume up to 40 to 50% of total development cost. And one of persons that I follow, and you might, if you follow me too, I do a lot of writing in the Medium publication in an analyst corner. And also Carl Wingers also does a lot of writing, and I think he's got like a science degree, and has done a lot of work in that development and technical space. And he's put a fact around the requirements errors account for 70 to 85% of rework cost. That is quite large. So 40 to 50% of that total development cost is spent on this rework. So it's important to think about, you know, what impact we have and how we can do that better to ensure that we get the requirements right. So some of those impacts, and I guess it's more like what if we have poor business analysis, what that results into getting inaccurate requirements or incomplete. And sometimes, you know, times it's not even our fault, it's having those right key stakeholders that to own up and give us those requirements. Missing of having those incorrect features or functionalities being documented. Project scope creep and changes can have a huge impact on that as well, particularly if we're not controlling the scope correctly. We have had a scenario where we had a project that we had a implementation team on the other side that was outsourced to deliver, and we had an internal team of business analysts providing requirements. And to throw it on the other fence, for example, which is our vendor that will do implementation, the idea was that they will be working on those detailed functional requirements, and we had high-level requirements, and they had different tools that they were using. For example, they were in Jira. We had you know, stakeholders that wanted you know, documents and things signed off and proper governance and procedure. So I've had a person managing that, and there's been situations where you know, we dropped the requirements or scope change in our space, but didn't quite get to the other side. So that's quite important. And, you know, and obviously there's human error involved in, you know, we're all humans at the end of the day. Business objectives not being met, and that was what was mentioned in chat before. It's very important that whatever we do, we kind of tie back to that overall strategic objective that we're trying to meet. And if we didn't get it right, for example, and quite often, you know, we go to projects and we might use that 80-20% rule because we need to go live. Sometimes businesses do accept some of those requirements being missed, and what that can cause a business disruption, and also not meeting the expectation, and also that poor system adoption where the people that are using are just not happy with the solution. So I'll take you through my favorite chart, getting business analysis model. And to me, I'll start from the left-hand side where I see governance. We need to ensure that we have right governance so that we have the high quality of BA work. So the governance will incorporate having right practices set up. And sometimes you might go on a project or enter an organization, a practice is already in place, but they might not assist them. This might have room for improvement, and you could add potentially huge value in improving those. And we also need processes, as it was mentioned in the chat before, which will assist you and your organization to actually move in the right direction. And design is another one that I think that design thinking is very important from a business angle, where, you know, if something, particularly in a digital transformation, it's important to have the concept on a digital design in practice, and using a lot of customer journeys or things that work in those particular projects from that delivery visual. I'm quite a visual person, so design thinking resonates with me really well. Quality, which is kind of in that heart of the business analysis, and I deal with that a lot, you know, particularly being in that leadership space, that it's very important that we design that high quality so our teams can perform in a quality that is expected, that we got templates that are easy to use and they provide quality outcomes, that we mentor and provide appropriate reviews and approval process in place. With my team, at one stage, I was managing over 30 BAs, believe it or not. I did a team budding program where I've team budded BAs, because what I knew is once they go on those huge programs that they get lost with working within the teams, that they always had a buddy to go to in a BA space to review the documentation. We also had samples, what good requirement looks like, what not so good. I won't call them bad requirements. The requirements are not, that bad from that quality perspective. Oops, sorry, I've just going to press the button because I'm not finished yet. The next one is collaboration, very important part of business analysis. This is making sure that we have effective, we need to make sure we have effective collaboration in order to have a successful requirements outcomes on the project. It's ensuring that we've got right people involved, hence I've got the people. It's also building, and I've got little heart there, but it's about building those trustful relationships, making sure that they are stakeholders trust us to be able to share that information, that we can deep dive into their way of thinking. And also competency. Competency is very important, building the right competency to get the right outcomes, that we have the right people doing the right things at the right time, and that we own our work. It's very important that as business analysts, whether you're a leader or a business analyst, that you be proud of your work and own your work. So next slide kind of summarizes what I'm deep dive into now, but thinking about it, and I'd like you to have a think of it. So what does it take to do well in business analysis? We talk about challenges. We covered a lot of problems that we faced. But how do we turn that around? Even that little bit of doing better. What has it involved? People. I always put people in the front of everything that I do. To me, it's all about people. People within your team, stakeholders, people that you're working with. Could be your project manager. That you have the continuous involvement and communication and trust. The highlighted trust to me, once you develop that trust and you can have those open for conversations, even when you're vulnerable, you overall as a team get a better outcome. It's about structure, having the right structure. But the reason why I highlighted right structure is having the actual right structure for your organization, for your project. And what I mean by you might find a structure that works well for one organization. For example, for me, and I have taken all that off for my finance sector, but if I go to the health centre, I might need to restructure the right structure and build the right structure and practices and standards for them. I ended up at Unisuma coming up with a service catalogue, and this was reason being because BA practice was new to them, and I wanted to portray to the other businesses, well, what are the service offerings that business analysts provide? So for example, for that organisation, that has worked well. And that was coupled with tools to support those activities. Ownership. Take ownership of the project, take pride in the work that you do. And somebody mentioned add value. I always think about when I do business analysis work is what value am I adding? I feel I'm not achieving anything if I'm not adding value from a business analysis angle. And getting those business analysis right is about collaboration, as covered before, ensuring that right people are involved. Again, there was something in a chat about that. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that you've got the right people? It goes back to that collaboration, going around and taking that ownership to talk to your project manager, talk to your sponsor, take initiative and put a stakeholder matrix and even talk to your change team and make sure that you don't miss anything. We've also used a sample within we have situations where we still write business requirements documents, that we had a list of like a checklist that covers all the areas, like legal compliance is very big in our industry, and all other stakeholders for different areas that we potentially should be thinking about that we need to get involved. Have a clear understanding what the purpose and your needs are, and always tune into those stakeholders. But what I mean by tuning stakeholders is also systems. Have a bit of an understanding of what systems are you impacting. If you don't know much about the system, Google's your friend. Do a research, get yourself on board, so that when you're talking to architects or solution designers, that you can understand where they're coming from the solution perspective. And this could also assist you framing that collaboration back to stakeholder, talking in their own language. Set the right business analysis expectation. Make sure that you, at the start, set what's expected of you, what deliverables you'll be producing. We need to ensure that we have right governance in place, that we design high quality around the scope, that we have strong requirements standard, and the quality review process, and approve. I know approval process can be a little bit tricky when you're in agile environments, but I've always ensured that I've got some form of tracking that what's in, for example, when we're talking about user story in agile methodologies, that there is some kind of that approval or acknowledgement or endorsement of what we're capturing as requirements. And then it's also conducting a detailed groundwork to ensure that we capture all the requirements, and also working with our change partners. Competency. So competency is also, so if you're a leader, or you might be a senior BA, or you're inspiring senior BA that wants to become a leader, you need to ensure that there is the right balance in your competency level. So ensuring that you've got the right skills and apportion those across the work that you need to undertake. And upskill, where have a plan of upskilling and learning where it's required. Conduct professional development. We do a lot of mentoring, coaching and training, and also regularly undertake those competency skills audit. And I'll be look at your skill set as a competence as well as individuals. And I'll cover a little bit, I'll give you some sample a little bit later of what I've used and found that that has worked in the past for me. So I'll pause for a minute and just to get a bit of an idea. And I liked if you can pop in a chat. What do you think are the key 3 core competencies that every BA should have? I'll open up the chat. Wow, I've got some really good inputs in here from previous. Communication skills. Influence, negotiation, definitely. Negotiation skills. Yes, looking for people's perspective. People's person, I like that. I don't know what you would do if you're not a people's person. It'll be very difficult to perform our job. That's why I struggle. I didn't become a programmer in some ways. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So what I like to put in and reflect what we discussed now, I've come up with this tree, and this tree highlights how complex our world is. And this is just the snippets of what we actually, from a core competence perspective, we need to have. I have aligned these knowledge areas to IIBA BABOK. Most of you will be aware of that, and hopefully I find it adds a lot of value in my BA world. And I've put it in a sense of translate back to how some of those competencies we have applied in our organizations at UniSuper. So if you look at the bigger trees, which are called like those core competency areas, And little trees are more like your underlining areas, and also some of the techniques that you need to know. So if I look at these, I go, oh my God, BAs just have to have such a vast knowledge and experience in a lot of different areas. And no business, I can see no business analysis like that. And it takes years. I think it takes years of experience. It takes years of having the opportunities also, and also building your skill set yourself. So if you look at the bigger trees, like for example, business analysis, planning and monitoring, what I find that's quite obviously an important area. And I do have a lot of strategic analysts when you get to that senior level, and being able to kind of look at the strategic point of view, and trying to develop for those at the strategic level, strategic horizon, where you're looking at all the goals and organization working closely when you're shaping out what initiative, what will come in play, is where you work at that level. Some of the things you would want to think about is your analytical thinking and problem solving, because you still work at a high level, working out what problems and challenges that are most important to an organization. For example, you might be looking at business cases and facilitate decision making with your key stakeholders. There'll be a lot of planning. Customer journeys I find very useful for business to see what, walking in a customer's shoes and see what those problems look like. And then we get into the strategic analysis. So that's where we look at the process mapping. We might be looking at different behaviours. We might use mind maps to visually provide, again, some of those problems and things that we need to discover. And BA planning is also important in these phases, because we need to start planning and fleshing out what our business analysis looks like. Then we get into elicitation and collaboration, is where we start talking about those high-level requirements, or shall I say that they're referred to as part of our IIBA and BABOK as business or stakeholder requirements. There are much of that requirement statement level. And once we get to the next phases of the project, your initiation before execution, we get into these, I call it this big leave, called the requirements management, where we deep dive into our functional requirements, and to a level to where developers can develop, testers, and we need to make sure testers can test, and we've got enough of the change to see from an impact perspective. At this phase, it's quite crucial on every project, and it involves a lot of work. And supporting that, it's quite important to have your business knowledge, even your solution knowledge, if you want to get into that more technical space. Communication skills, and most importantly for us particular, and I'm sure nowadays is around information security and cyber security. We've had lots of leakages, particularly. I don't know if you might have heard Optus. My personal data was actually exposed, and I had to change my driver license. It's very big to look at on every project. And when we look at on this side, those skills and techniques, we need to think about the fit gap analysis, and not forgetting non-functional requirements. Quite often, a lot of projects, individuals forget about non-functional. What does it mean? I happen to build a whole central repository, a Unisuper, and finding out whole ownership was like a totally new world for non-functional requirements. And I'm using some of those agile terminologies like backlog management and having those user stories. We need to be accustomed to those as well. And we mentioned skills and communication, but it's those interpersonal skills, particularly if you're head of a game, frontline, capturing those, facilitating workshops. It's very important that we have those interpersonal skills, as well as looking at your body language and mindfulness, which we discovered earlier around how brain works. Having the right tools and the technologies, making sure, we know how to use, I'm sure everybody uses Visio, but whatever the company's using, for example, to process map, whether to capture requirements, whether it's Jira, or even proposing and assessing something new for your company that could provide better management of our requirements. And it's very important to capture meeting minutes of quite often, and I'm very big, I've got templates in my team to make sure that whatever's discussed in a specific meeting, they've got a clear understanding of what was discussed from a requirements, action items, and following through. So I find, not to have misinterpretation, that it's very important to have meeting minutes and jotting down those observations. At the bottom, just a big highlight of those items, more elaborated within those leaves, like creative thinking, visual and conceptual thinking, decision making, which we talked about, but it's also learning, that continuous learning from your mistakes, learning from projects that went well or didn't go so well, where we can prove and take it with us. Trustworthiness, having that trust, being adaptable and being accountable for your work. And what I find quite important here in Australia is also industry knowledge. It does help if you have that. We have a lot of projects going on at the moment in financial, insurance sector and superannuation. And also there's your mobile and digital stuff that's going on. We're looking at a solution knowledge and cloud, Azure, but also network infrastructure. That can be quite a boring project for some. But I do have technical analysts that I've had to assign to use the analytical skills and deliver those network and infrastructure project. Active listening, very important too, and I've been working on that myself, particularly in my private life with my kids, to stop and listen, what they're trying to say. Written and verbal communication. And lastly, that facilitation, teamwork, negotiation, and conflict of interest, which we mentioned before in our chat. So why is core competency important, you may ask? One of the reasons is that it provides a skill standard, like your basic skill standards that specify that knowledge area. And it also provides the ability for an organisation, even you as a BA or a BA team, to be successful in that organisation or a project. It provides us with the ability to succeed. So competency, understanding what good looks like, or not so good looks like. What are the standards? IIB is a great way to be in tune with, because we've got a set of standards that we can share with our college and bring them on their journey. So it really provides us with that ability to succeed. It also provides us a measure of skills and knowledge. How can we measure? How many requirements, for example, have we missed? And some of them not totally our fault, but if we do requirements matrix, how does that align to what was expected? And I put in this slide because it is for those available in IIB, which again just shows you how big our area is. And I've picked up bits and pieces out of these, but it really underlines all the key area, the knowledge areas, and why the competency model is important to us as business analysts. As I mentioned earlier, I was going to share a core competency assessment that I have created. I have used it with my teams and individuals, organisation that I have coached in setting up business analysis practices and also auditing their own competency. Is looking at a key competency, so looking at the high level, if we go back and reflect on knowledge areas that we specified earlier, is looking at those key knowledge areas and assessing yourself, either yourself or your team members, where on a scale 1 to 5 you feel you might be. You might be low in limited knowledge, for example, in planning, and you might potentially a junior to a media level business analyst, and that's rightly so. It takes years of experience to get to that level. You might have some idea, or you might have done work in strategic analysis. You might want to put yourself as number 2, and the same goes for the other areas. And then what I do, if there's a key area that I want to focus on as a team or as an individual, you might drill down into those areas and look at what does it entail? What does it entail? What are the key activities in that planning and monitoring phase that I need to get myself across? So it could be your business, for example, analyst approach. It could be your plan, analysis. And I might rate myself 1 because I really have got limited knowledge. Then I will question myself, how do I get to 1 to 5? And what are those core skill sets? What is the junior, what I need to do? What is a training course that I need to do? Can I go and get a mentor? Can I go and learn or do research myself? The other one, as an example that I find works quite well with some people, is drawing these charts and kind of putting it down to that capability and rating yourself, whether you see yourself as a superstar. I see myself as a superstar in a business analysis capability approach, or I might rank myself in here. And again, using the same approach to actually help you do your own core assessment and audit and have a plan on where you want to get to. The other one that I like to share and I put in, this was, and I'm not sure anybody in this room might have seen this, and I found really, really amazing, by Michael Ogello. Michael Ogello is actually advisor to IIBA. I know he's traveled the world, so he might have been to Vancouver. I'm not quite sure, but he's shared this wonderful. We did bit of work with Commonwealth Bank here in Melbourne from a coaching perspective, and there is a bit of that stake where you can use the Podra model, where you can look at your competency, where you kind of lie. You might go, my programming skills have lapsed, then what do I do with this? I might rate myself, but from a priority perspective, I'll put in this quadrant. If it's stakeholder communication skills, they're strong, but depending if I'm a developer, that might be or might not be critical. So it's kind of looking at that quadrant and seeing it with your BA lens and putting yourself where you feel that may fit from your criticality perspective as well. And lastly, I love this little funnel. It's one of my favorite slides. Reflecting back on what was discussed previously, we've had numerous conversations in our chats. What I like to take away is key ingredients that I personally see as part of this little funnel that will get you close to getting the business analysis right. And for some, I've done a bit of a research on LinkedIn and asked people to vote. The voting has been mainly around that 80-20% rule in getting it right, because it's very difficult to get something done 100% of the time. But to me, the first and most important, and I keep on reiterating, is people. It's about your stakeholders and your interactions. It's about collaboration, having those healthy relationships, understanding the purpose, the needs, having clearly understanding that why are we doing what we're doing. Any expectations? It's about knowledge. We do need to have the knowledge. And if you don't, I suggest keep on building that business and also technical knowledge. I think it's important for us to understand technical knowledge. It's having the right structure, practices, standards, tools. It's having competency. Have a competency plan. Go through your audit. You might find some previous slides useful as a start to assess, even at the high level, and align it to the BABOK. Competency skill audit, and also your professional development. It's very important to think about your professional development. Quality, so your peer review, governance and standards. And the last thing, I love the word done. It's kind of the agile terminology, but think about those key words, particularly from the BA angle. Why are you providing business analysis? To who? What you're trying to achieve? What are those key goals? How are you going to do it? When do you need to do it from a project perspective? And where do you need to be? Do you have to be virtual, for example? Do you have to be in the office? Do you have to change areas? Now, I'm trying to be conscious of the time. And what I like quickly just to pause, maybe just for a minute before I get to my last slide, is on reflection. What I like to do, pause and write down three things that you can take away from here today, could be from your ingredients slide or from my Getting Business Analysis model, right? Write them down and think about what you're going to be working for the next 3 months. Write down some actions and goals that you can reflect back on and check in a 3 months time. I'm only going to allow a minute because I know I'm going to leave some time for the questioning. Competency growth, I like that. Domain knowledge, I like that. And, you know, and that's a journey in itself. I think domain knowledge you build over years and learning. Okay, I'll take myself to the next slide in the interest of the size. So I'd like to thank you for having this opportunity to present on the other side of the world. It's been absolutely amazing. Where you can find me on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. I do have a LinkedIn group, eGrow Guild. It's just a discussion group where we kind of talk about certain things. There's any jobs on the market. If you scan through and provide me with your email address, I have got a BA mindset checklist that I'd love to share with you. And I have put in an upcoming ebook because I'm actually in a process of publishing an ebook around the art of getting business analysis right. And that in itself has been a journey for me and my professional development. And it's just at the moment with the designer, but what I'd like to share with you, particularly my chapter 7, and it's those skills required to be a good business analyst from my upcoming ebook. So if you provide me your email, I'll share that with you. And additionally, actually, as we speak, I'm working with IRBA. They've got a career centre, and I will be putting my coaching career services also on IIBA, but that's coming up. We're just working through that with IIBA members. Thank you, and I'll leave it to Ramzan.